Hi, I'm Rabbi Jan Uhrbach, the director of the Block Hulker Center for Spiritual Arts at JTS, and I am here with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Dr. Pamela Barmash. Pamela is an associate professor of Hebrew, Bible, and Biblical Hebrew at Washington University and co-chair of the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, and a very popular professor and a highly published author. You have a new book just came out, yes?
Yes.
Mazel tov on the new book. But we're here really to talk about your brand new translation of the book of Esther, which the Rabbinical Assembly will be publishing. When can we expect to see it? Do we know?
Well, the hard copy will come out for Purim 2022. They're anticipating the PDF within a week or so. Just
Yes.
for this year, 2021.
Right. So the book will be out for next year, but we're going to be, with thanks to the RA, we're all premiering your wonderful new translation. So thank you for joining me to talk about this. Since we both of us wear many hats in our professional lives, I thought I would wear my Purim hat today. So this is one of my favorite Purim hats, which will get me in the mood to talk about the book of Esther. So how do you approach biblical translation work? Like, how do you even start thinking about that?
Well, there has been two general approaches to biblical translation. One is something that tries to tie the words in the target language to the words in Hebrew exactly. So this is most famously done in the translation by Buber Rosenzweig from the early part of the 20th century. Everett Fox has done this as well in his translation, but it has a long history because it actually goes back to the ancient translation of the Bible into Greek, into what's called the Septuagint, right? The translation with the famous story of 72 translators, each in his own room translating it exactly. And the style of the Septuagint diverges from that of classical Greek because the translators, well, whether or not they were 72 each in a separate room,
Right.
tried to make the Greek sound more Hebraic, to mirror the syntax of Hebrew more clearly. So that's one general style. The other style is an idiomatic style, trying to translate the larger meaning, not the specific words in a mechanical fashion, but to try for the larger meaning, what is more idiomatic from one language to another. And that's the style that I've adopted. Now, in using the style, I've tried to push it a little further by trying to show the connotations of words. So every word has a denotation, right? It's exact rendering, it's exact meaning. And so in translating from Hebrew to English, you of course have to be very much aware of how a word in Hebrew can have a certain set of meanings that overlap with another word's certain set of meanings, but it's not exact, right? So you have to be, I think, much more innovative, improvisational, a little more free and fluid in translation. Let me give an example of that.
Great.
So in Hebrew, you have the word yashav, to sit. The thing is that if you translate every appearance of the verb yashav as to sit, it's not going to really reflect the wider array of meanings in English. So, for example, right at the beginning of the book of Esther, it says, Kishevet hamelech al kisei kivodo, as the king sat on his royal throne. Well, he wasn't glued to his throne, right? And 24/7 on his throne. It actually refers to another meaning of the verb to sit. It means to be in residence. So the Persian emperor had a number of royal seats, right? And he would go from one to another, perhaps based on, the weather, whether he got tired of certain people in one of the royal seats. And so here he's moved to Shushan, to Susa. And so there I want to translate the verb not as he sat on his royal seat, but rather as he was in residence on his royal seat. So the semantic range of the two words are overlap, but they also have different meanings between the two languages. But the other thing is that words have connotations. So for example, right, if you have the word halach in Hebrew, it means to walk, to go. But when it is in the verbal paradigm, hitpael, and I do understand for those people whose biblical Hebrew is not yet up to snuff, at times I'm going to refer to grammatical elements that will seem like I'm speaking Sumerian and not English. Right? So when that root is in hitpael, it has the connotation that something bad is about to happen. Right? So that, for example, when the story of the Garden of Eden has God mithalech, right, walking about, right, something bad is going to happen.
Wow.
Or when the prose tale of Job has Hasatan, the prosecuting angel, right? Mithalech, also walking in the hitpael verbal paradigm, that poor Job is not going to have some happy things happen to him. Right. Rather, so it's important to understand both the meanings, but the larger connotations of words. Let me give one more example. When Megillat Esther moves into the story of Mordechai, it introduces Mordechai as Ish Yehudi Haya B'Shushan Habira Ushmo Mordechai. There was a man in the royal capital, and I'll talk more about that word, of Shushan. His name was Mordechai. Well, that's not a phrase that should be translated word for word, because it has the connotation of a fable, a parable, a fairy tale. And really, it should be understood as once upon a time, right, in the capital of Shushan, there was a man by the name of Mordechai.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So it really presents this story as kind of a tale. And of course, it operates on so many levels, a level of fun, right? A level of criticism, a level of peril, a level of zaniness. And that, if a translator can try to express that in a translation, is really what I have tried to do.
Wow. So is there anything about the Hebrew in the book of Esther that's different from the Hebrew of the rest of Tanakh? Is there something special about this book?
Well, in two ways. One is the Hebrew of the Bible really fits into two groups, right? So there is the early or classical biblical Hebrew of the Chumash and of the prophet section, which was extant, which was used during the First Temple period from about 1000 BCE till the destruction of the temple in 587, 586 BCE. And then there's a changeover. There is Hebrew of the Second Temple period. And that's Hebrew that feels very up to date. It feels very current. And I know it seems a little strange to talk about biblical Hebrew sounding edgy, right? New, modern, because if everything in the Bible seems kind of old-timey, from a long time ago, but late biblical Hebrew really does feel up to date and modern and new, right? And so how in the world do you reflect that in the language? So let me give a couple examples, some of which I think I've been successful in, and some perhaps less successful.
Okay.
Right? So I mentioned the word birah, which I translated initially as royal capital. Now, that happens to be a word that's found in late biblical Hebrew, right, but not in classical or early biblical Hebrew, where you would have the word, let's say, mitsudah or migdal for fortress. So in trying to think through like what would be a good way to translate birah that reflects its newness, I came up with the word acropolis. Okay.
Wow.
So it sounds different. It sounds more like the period of the Second Temple period, because there you have Greek starting to become an important language and Greek culture becoming important. And so I think with translating birah as imperial acropolis, it sounds newer or at least different. Right? But what do you do about other words? So for example, one of the words that's used in Esther is igeret, which is a word influenced by Aramaic. One of the great influences on Hebrew during the transition between classical or early biblical Hebrew and late biblical Hebrew is the Aramaic language. And so many words were absorbed by Hebrew from Aramaic. Aramaic being a very close language to Hebrew, there were syntactic functions, right? Syntax, I should explain what that is how words interact in a sentence. Yes, once I'm using linguistics terminology that I need to explain. And also, the influence of Aramaic is so great upon Hebrew, and what I'm going to say now may seem crazy, is that we actually use the Aramaic alphabet to write Hebrew, right? The Hebrew alphabet technically isn't the Hebrew alphabet, it's actually the Aramaic alphabet. So when you have words that are absorbed from Aramaic, how in the world do you translate it so that it seems more up to date and different from early biblical Hebrew? So the word igeret means letter. And, I reflected on, maybe I should use the word text. I mean, that seems more up to date. Maybe I should even use the word text message, but that seems a little ridiculous.
Right.
In the middle of a translation of a text that dates from the Persian period or is set in the Persian period. So one of the issues that I found difficult and did not succeed 100% is showing how later forms of Hebrew should be reflected in the English translation.
So what did you choose? Did you use letter?
I ended up just using the word letter.
Whew. You didn't ruin my Purim spiel. Good. So you stuck with letter.
I stuck with letter, right? Or like the word kitav, which is a written document. So there I wrote writ. I mean, what else do you say? So sometimes you can reflect the newness, and sometimes you're just kind of stuck with the old words, the words that you would traditionally use in a translation. I mean, that's, the problem with English is that we're translating it into modern English. It would be better in some sense to translate into different registers or different levels, chronological levels of English, but that would end up, making the Bible sound like it was written by Shakespeare.
Right, right. So how different is the story going to sound to those of us who are used to hearing it? Like how different is this translation?
Well, I mean, the question is, will you really have a greater sense of what the words feel like?
Right.
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 There's, of course, the famous Italian saying, which is the translator is a traitor. Right. And to what extent can a translator really bring what the language feels like? And let me give another example of this, right? In Hebrew, the word zeh is often added to a question or phrase to make it more intense. And sometimes it even makes it more colloquial, right? So what do you do with King Achashverosh's exclamation when Esther tells him that a member of his own court is trying to take the life of Esther and her co-religionists, right? He says, Mihu zeh ve'ezehu, right? Right. And so do you translate who is it and where is he? Right. So I chose to translate it in capital letters to express how intense the language is, that it's not just, okay, where's the salt,
Right.
right? So, I mean, biblical Hebrew does not have bold or italics or underlining, right? And even though we do have a few places where letters are larger or smaller, that's probably for issues of scribal transmission where they weren't quite sure or they wanted to emphasize something that could easily be confused. But in an English translation, we have some more, right, options than the ancient scribes. And so translating something and putting it all in caps is one way to express that.
Neat. So I don't want to take too much of your time. I'm really looking forward to reading it. I do have to ask, at the risk of a spoiler alert, does Haman still die at the end?
Yes, he still dies at the end.
Okay, good. So my hat is off to you for this wonderful contribution to all of us. I'm so excited that we're going to get to use this new translation.
I'm delighted.
And kol hakavod, thank you so much.
Thank you.